Hello, welcome everybody. My name is JD and this is my channel Frost and Forest. So today I am going to be talking to you and sharing with you some of the decks that I used in March. So for me, March was definitely the beginning of spring. We did not have much snow. Things are starting to green up. We started to get some rain. So it did kind of feel to me like the nature in my area was starting to open up. And so as I've said before, I work with decks very seasonally. So I would say that a lot of the decks I'm going to show you today are probably great options for spring decks. So some of the decks that I'm going to share with you are decks that I use for my week ahead spread. Every Sunday afternoon or evening, I do a quick 4-card spread to just kind of start out my week. And so the first 4 decks that I'm going to show you are going to be the ones that I used for my week ahead spread. And so the first one that I'm going to be talking to you about is the Seasons of the Witch Ostara. It is obviously a part of the Seasons of the Witch series. It does feel very much like spring. Ostara was in March, so that makes a lot of sense. This deck also kind of has an Easter vibe to me as well, because there are a lot of references to Easter eggs, and just kind of that kind of thing. So this was a fun deck to use in March. For my week ahead spread, this was kind of my deck that was sort of like my theme for the week. So it's the first card I pulled. I do think the colors in this are pretty. I love the green in this. I don't think that this is my favorite Seasons of the Witch deck. Like Painted Eggs, that kind of reminds me of Easter. I don't think this is my favorite Season of the Witch deck, but I am definitely glad that I have it. And it was nice to use it for my week ahead spread. So this is the first deck I used in March. Also, I will just say I'm not showing you all the decks that I used in March. These were just some of the decks that I used more in March. A deck that I'm going to show you that I also used in my week ahead spread is the Stolen Child. The Stolen Child Tarot. So this is a really pretty deck. And so this is one that I always pull out during the spring time because it just has that vibe to it. And so in my week ahead spread, I was using this as the card for the, I guess, challenge of the week. I love this Queen of Swords with the birds and the cardinal and woodpecker. This is one of my favorite Queen of Swords. And the chickadee, yeah, I really like this one. So yeah, I kind of use this for the card that I pulled for sort of the challenge of the week. I like this deck. For a long time, I wasn't sure about it because it's sort of a weird premise in some ways about animals that are kind of, or kids that are partly animal. But I think the art is beautiful, and as a kid who spent a lot of time outside growing up, it definitely feels like my vibe. And I like that the suits, for example, are oak. I think that that's kind of cool. So yeah, I think this is a beautiful deck. And this is the Stolen Child Tarot, and I used this as sort of my challenge card for my week ahead spread. The next deck that I used for my week ahead spread is the Forest Lore Tarot. This is a deck that always very much feels like a spring deck to me. And I always end up pulling it out this time of year. Just because the colors feel very spring and Eastery to me. In my 4-card spread for the week, this as my kind of blessing card that I pull for the week. I really like this deck. It has, you know, very foresty, naturey vibe, which is definitely my vibe. One thing I will say is I sometimes have a little bit of trouble with this deck because I'll be looking at it and I'll be like, oh, there's a blah, blah, blah. But then when I look at the guidebook, because this centers like the bird species, you know, the birds look very similar to birds that we have here in the US, but the nature is centered on nature that is found in the UK. And so even though the animals look like animals that I might find where I am, the animals end up being very different a lot of the times. And so in some ways that kind of, I have a little bit of trouble with that, but I've also gotten to the place of where I just don't, you know, try to necessarily guess what the animal is. I just wait until I read the guidebook, because you know what, in the UK they have different species than we do here, even if they look kind of similar. So yeah, this is a great deck. This is the Forest Lore Tarot. The last deck that I kind of used in my week ahead spreads for March is the Hour Tarot. And so in my week ahead spread, I used this card as kind of my advice card. So it was the last card in that spread. I like to pull this card out I like to pull this deck out in March because it is, Women's History Month. And so this feels like a good deck to use around that time. And this is the mass market version, but it has a really, really like book size, chunky book size guidebook. And each of these women that are in this deck get 2 or 3 or 4 book size pages about them. And so one of the practices that I like to do is every week I pull a card and then I make sure I spend some time reading about that woman and what she did and why she was important. And so yeah, this is the other card that I use in my week ahead spread. And then because I liked it how it paired with the Hour Tarot, another deck that I use quite a bit in March is the Womanhood Revisited Tarot. I think these two decks pair really nicely together, especially for Women's History Month. And so, yeah, I was kind of pulling that energy. These were the two decks that I was using. And I think they pair really nicely together. The Womanhood Revisited is kind of an interesting deck. It has a lot of different textures. Some of the cards are a little bit pixelated. Some of the keywords are a little bit different. But at the end of the day, I still really like it. And I like these two decks together. So this was a pairing that I used quite a bit in March. So this is the Our Tarot and the Womanhood Revisited Tarot. The next 3 decks that I'm going to show you are decks that I used because they had kind of a spring vibe to me. So, you know, nature, animals are starting to come back out and be more active. Birds are migrating back. Things are starting to green up a little bit. And so the next few decks are ones that kind of fit that vibe for me. Of course, I had to mention, this is the Little Bird Tarot. I love these backs. They're so beautiful. This is such a beautiful deck. It's one that I immediately pulled out as soon as I started hearing all of our birds start to come back. It felt like spring to me, and I just wanted that bird energy now that they were all back. And so I started using this deck quite a bit for just everyday spreads, for, you know, quick questions, but also longer ones. One of the things that I really like about this deck is I feel like you can use it for a quick, you know, just a quick question, because there are the great keywords in the guidebook. But also, if you want to go deeper and you want to do some more introspection, you can spend some more time with the guidebook. Because there are great entries from Audubon. But then there are also, you know, entries from the creator. So this is a great deck. I think it's currently out of print, but I know that Shanna is working on a reprint right now. So it is not going to be out of print forever. So if you love this deck the way that I do, don't worry, you can get your hands on a copy of it. So yeah, this is the Little Bird Tarot. Another deck that has a very spring vibe to me is, and I used a lot in March, is the Tarot Renard. I love this deck. I think it's really cute. I think it's really easy to use. I think the colors are great. I have found that this deck pairs really nicely with the Matlock Oracle decks. So I was doing that a lot in March, is pairing this along with that. But this just very much feels like a spring deck to me. I think it's partially because of the white in the background. I also think it's because it is so green, and so it just feels like when spring starts to green up. And I could see myself probably using this one in April and May as well, just as we continue to move towards summer, because I think it's still a great deck for that. But this is just a really sweet deck, and it's this deck with one of the Matlock decks just was great for me if I needed something light and sweet in a reading. So yeah, this was the Tarot Renard. Another deck that I used because it had a very spring vibe to me was the Whimsical Goddess Tarot. This is a deck that I got a while ago, but I hadn't used it a ton. And for whatever reason, it just felt right this spring to use it. I think it's very green, but I think some of the background blue colors also just felt kind of spring to me because we have a lot of those rainy, sleety, snowy kind of days. And so this just kind of felt right to me. I think that this is a very cute deck. It's little, it fits in my hand. Yeah, and I like it. It's very naturey. I love those mushrooms. I love that it has a diversity in body type. It is an only female deck, I think. But yeah, it is a really sweet deck. See, this kind of feels wintry, and so that's why it's kind of a nice mix in this time of year when you never know if it's going to rain, snow, or be sunny. So yeah, this is another one I used a lot in March, and this is the Whimsical Goddess Tarot. Last three decks that I have to show you are decks that I used a lot in March because they were new to me in March. And so they were some of those decks that once you got them, they just kind of stayed on your table and you kind of used them a lot. And so that's what happened with the last three, or the last couple decks that I'm going to show you. First deck I'm going to show you is Superlunaris Tarot. This is a deck that I was actually surprised at how much I loved it. For a long time, I was like, I have a lot of modern decks. That doesn't feel like my vibe. I don't know. But Robin at Robin's Reflections really loves this deck. And so it's kind of a Robin made me do it type thing, where she just talks so highly of this deck. And this deck, or this creator, posted that they were going to, you know, once their decks were gone, they were gone. And so I just wanted to have an opportunity to try this deck and see it before it went out of print. And I'm really happy I did, because I actually really love it quite a lot. And so I'm happy that I decided to get it. You know, it's so hard in those situations about a deck is going out of print and you have to decide if you're going to get it or not. And I feel like for me, I've had situations like this. I love this Nine of Pentacles. I think this is so beautiful. Situations like this where it turns out that I actually am really glad I have the deck. And then I feel like there are other situations where I've done this and I have been really like, turns out if you don't want it when it's in print, you don't want it when it's out of print. And so it's just hard to know. But this is an example of a deck that I am glad I got. And I did decide to get the linen edition just because I like linen. I tend to have an easier time shuffling it. So yeah, this is one that's just been sitting out on my table. It pairs with a lot of things and I've just been using it a lot. So this is the Superlunaris Tarot. Another deck that I used a ton in March, because I got it in March, is the Sassy Dragon Tarot. I really love this deck. It is so cute. I love the size of it. It's easy for me to shuffle. It feels nice. It's just a really great deck. I love how it is sassy. I have the Safe for Work version because that's the one that I liked. But yeah, it's just great, and I love the little sayings on it. I also, maybe this is obvious to everybody else, but I didn't realize that until I started using it a bunch, that the dragons were, their color related to their suit for the most part. So like swords have yellow dragons, pages have, or wands have red dragons, all of the aces are white. I just didn't notice that right away. Maybe that's obvious to everybody else. But yeah, I think this deck is great. I tended to use this just for like quick pulls, or even sometimes if I just wanted to play with some cards or shuffle. Because this deck is so easy for me to shuffle, it was one that I just had fun shuffling in March. So yeah, this is another deck. I also do think it kind of feels like it could be a spring, summery type deck. But yeah, it's very cute. I love these little dragons. This is the last deck that I'm going to share with you, and I got this one right at the end of March. So I didn't use it a ton, but I wanted to share it because I spent a lot of time with it. So this is a Gothic Tale Tarot. And so as I talked about in my last video, that I, talked about some of my favorite decks right now, I have been kind of attracted to some darker decks as well right now. And so I was really excited to see this deck. This is the deck that was created by Rochelle at Amethyst Ascension. And so even though I got this deck at the end of March, I ended up spending a lot of time with it because I cut the edges off of it. It came with a border that was kind of this color. And so I took off the edges. This definitely is not a perfect cutting job. I will tell you that on this edge, I wish there was just a teeny bit more of that like border here. And so, piece of advice for y'all is if it feels like it might be a little bit too close, it probably is a little bit too close, because I had this feeling when I was cutting this edge that it was just too close. But anyway, follow your instinct when you're cutting down your deck. But at the end of the day, it doesn't bother me that much. When I'm actually pulling cards, it's totally fine. And honestly, for this being the second deck that I have ever cut down and taken the edges off, I'm pretty happy with that. So yeah, I think this deck is really cool. It's really dark, but the art is really kind of deep. There's a lot to look at. So yeah, this is another deck that I didn't use a ton, but I spent a lot of time with in March. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. These were some of the decks that I used in March. I did use some other decks as well, but these were the ones that were kind of repeat users throughout the month. Yeah, so thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next video.